Hi, I am your host, Geraldine Anello, and you are back in the Handy Women channel. I'm very excited to be here today for another spotlight. Today's guest is Kerry McKenzie. Hey, Kerry.
Hi there. How are you doing, Geraldine?
I'm so good, and I'm super excited to be here today. So, we're going to be talking about your story, and I love your story because what you said happened and what started your Handy Woman's journey is you said your single mother bought a house with all of her savings, and so she had to work nonstop to pay the mortgage, and you became the de facto contractor to
Okay.
get that house up to speed. Can you please tell me about that transition of like you get in the house and now you're a contractor?
So it was very interesting on my part. I felt like it was either that or we were ending up, house poor without doing it a little, at least a little bit on our own. So my mom started off, working, renting. She was renting initially and then working and saving. And then she made that down payment. And we kind of thought, okay, this is all we need, right, to move in. Now we have a house. But, with the down payment she had, obviously, you're not going to get the best homes with some of the lower down payments. So we end up learning how to really exist in a home with one, lots of problems, and then how to resolve those problems over time. So when it first started, we moved in and we saw little things, like wood paneling in the basement. Maybe some like the stairs weren't quite necessarily the best going up the stairs. And a lot of the updates that were necessary, like the kitchen was not built uh, the way we would have probably been able to use it most efficiently. So little things like that kind of started adding up and adding up. And when we started looking at the cost, it was just absolutely cost prohibitive for us to really hire it out. So we just kind of started, we went to town. I'm really grateful that my mom was able to be an employee at a home improvement store because that saved us a ton of time, a ton of money, a ton, like just in general, it saved us a lot of headaches that we would have probably had to have gone through because at the time there wasn't YouTube the way there is today. Nobody was able to just click on a link and say, oh, let's see how these other ladies are doing it. So we really had to kind of ask a lot of the questions necessary in order to make it doable. So starting from the basement, we started with completely re-walling the basement. It was completely wood paneling, so we changed that to uh, drywall or gypsum board, or other different people call it differently, sheetrock, depending on where you're located. Then we went and we actually extended the bathroom in there in order to have a shower because it previously only had the toilet and the sink. Then we also had to create the closets for some bedrooms in the basement. So we really had to kind of go all out in the basement in order to make it a livable space, especially since I was there and she was there as well. So that was maybe one of the reasons why I took it so closely to heart because that was going to be, my space. So I went to town, that's how I learned to use tools. The miter saw, my mom gifted me a miter saw for one of my birthdays. I thought that was hilarious. I started using a lot of the table saws that, like the radial arm saw, which a lot of people are very afraid of, but for me, it's one of my favorite saws, as odd as that sounds. And that's kind of how, I started slowly working my way into being a handy lady, I would say. Because by day, you would look at me and you wouldn't think, you wouldn't think I know all these things about tools, but then when you see me actually get into it, I love it. Like it's so much fun.
But that's the thing that's so interesting to me is the stereotype. It's like, why would anyone looking at you not think you would know about tools? And it's you, but it's not you. It's all of us women. Nobody thinks we know anything about tools. And I mean, just because we're women. So let's break the stereotypes and prove women know about tools and use them as well. I love that the story about your favorite tools. But I want to go back. So you did. How old were you
Oh, we
when
bought
that
the
started?
house. Yeah, so we bought the house when I was 17. So I started kind of right out of high school, just going straight to town, and it was actually a little bit difficult. I will not lie because it was one of those situations where I was in school and I was also working, and I was also doing like the handiwork, you know. So I mean, even some simpler things, like, I say simpler because they're simpler for me, but simpler things like changing a toilet, even though we had to do those things in order to get functional, you know, toiletries or toilets in the house. When it came to the time that it takes, you know, to acquire the necessary tools, to acquire the necessary products, and then actually have the assistance from my mom if necessary, you know, to actually put it in, it ended up being a lot, you know. For somebody coming out of high school, starting college, it was kind of, you never expect to be in that situation. So I don't know, but when it's out of necessity, right? Like, you pick things up really quickly, right? There's almost no way around that. Like, if you live in the country, you have to learn how to drive, you know? So that's another example of doing something out of necessity. I had to learn how to do a lot of these things. Otherwise, they were never going to get done, or we would have to save for months in order to get one simple thing done.
Yeah, and I find like that's true, that there's a few things that set women on that journey. And a lot of people in the Facebook group for handy women are single mothers, whether because they're, you know, divorced, separated, or widowed. And it's like, well, now I've got the house and I've got to upkeep it, so let's figure it out. What I'm curious about is, did you find that, you know, the gap between not having done any handiwork into your very first project, which I think you said was the dry walls in your basement, to then doing more projects, did you find the first one to be kind of the biggest mindset shift of like, I can't, it's too hard, I'm going to break things, to like, okay, now I kind of get a hang of like, I can do big projects? Or every new project is like a brand new thing?
I feel like every new project, at least for me, was like a brand new thing, because the drywall, once you start doing it, it's the same every time, or I shouldn't say the same, but it's very, very similar every time you do it. But if you've never done like plumbing and you have to change a faucet, you know, you'll look at it and you'll be like, oh my gosh, like, what am I supposed to do here? Like, what are all these tubes coming down? Like, which one connected to what? And very often, most homes don't have those kinds of things labeled, right? So it's not like you can say, oh, this is absolutely for sure, you know, the in. This is absolutely for sure going to the sprayer. This is absolutely for sure going to the shower. Like, a lot of those kinds of things are not labeled. So for me, each type of handiwork is, I consider um, a different learning curve completely. So for me, drywall, like learning about the dust, oh my goodness, I had no idea that this is what it took for a wall to be straight. The amount of dust, and I understand now why a lot of contractors don't do it because it's just such a messy job. But
Wait. So I don't know about this. So a lot of contractors don't do walls?
yeah, so like, for example, like a lot of general contractors, from what I've experienced, or at least maybe it's just this general area, but when they're
Where are
hiring,
you? Which area are you
oh yeah,
in?
so I'm located in the Greater Toronto area in Ontario, Canada.
Great.
So it's some of the contract, or at least I shouldn't say some, many of the contractors that we've worked with, if they're, for example, plumbing, and they need to cut into a wall to access the plumbing, they will not patch the wall after they've cut into it. They will likely outsource that to somebody who does drywall specifically, because that is, you know, not their realm of work. And I personally, when I'm looking at plumbing, I'm like, oh, well, why wouldn't you just do that? It's simple. But that's because that's been my experience now that I know how to do it. So it's kind of, I find it interesting that even within the different industries, like the different contracting industries, not everybody does or tries to merge into, you know, an industry that might be similar or might be related or might even be influenced based on what they're working on.
I am fascinated by the story about the labels. It makes so much sense that it should be labeled, because it seems like that would be something hard for anyone that comes, because obviously the people that build the house are not the same people that are going to live in it forever, are not the same people that are going to contract it. Like, there's always different people working on things, that of course it should be labeled. That's just such a simple thing you just said. I'm like, why isn't it? And maybe more handy women in the field will actually help.
Yeah,
Fix things like that. Like women, we can be organized, we can label things, we can do
exactly.
it.
And I feel like that's the kind of thing where, if I have, spices in my kitchen, and they're all the same color, if they're not labeled, then, your organization, you're going to probably use cumin if you're trying to use cinnamon, but it's not the
Yeah. And they're spices, so you want to smell them. But if you're looking at a
if you're looking at the
plumbing and know if
label.
it's sewage or shower, maybe you don't
Yeah.
want to put your nose in there.
No, you definitely don't.
That's
Well, that's
fascinating.
funny that you say that because that reminds me of when we like having to change toilets. Oh my goodness. Like the first time we did it, the mess we made. Oh my gosh, because we weren't sure what I shouldn't say we weren't sure, but we knew we had to drain it and we knew we had to like, get all the water out. But then when it came to carrying it outside, there was
Oh
no
no. Oh
there's
no.
nobody to instruct us, hold it this way or like make sure the bowl doesn't lean this way or did you empty like the actual bowl like the reservoir like little details like that I know from as I said now there's YouTube so anyone can just say how to change a toilet and go do it but at the time especially and then once again being me and my mom only working on it it was a unique experience let me say but after we did it the first time we never messed that up again. And we've changed our toilets about maybe six or seven toilets in the last 15 years.
Wait, so what has changed between the first time and the last time? Like what are the main takeaways?
Well, I honestly, it's all about how you drain it. That was kind of the biggest thing for me personally. I know we also that ring, so the seal ring that you use underneath the toilet, that is something that buying a quality ring, I forget what they're called, but the gasket, the wax gasket. When you buy that, there's many different thicknesses that you can buy. You can buy, the cheaper stuff that's a little bit thinner, or you can buy some more expensive stuff. And I personally have always been a big fan of quality over quantity because then you end up having to replace it sooner, right? Especially if you're maybe a heavier set person who's using the toilet. So I that was the one thing we learned right off the bat. We started buying the cheap stuff first, and then when we had to replace the gasket after a while, we realized, no, you got to go with the big stuff, and it makes a difference too, depending on how thick your flooring is, right? Between the actual sewage drain and the top of your flooring, because some people have layers of flooring, and then they just never build out the pipe, right? So there's so many different I could probably write a list. I don't know if we would have enough time for me to go through lessons learned from toilet changes.
I just love it. So if you're looking at a gasket, then which one are you just go for the most expensive or you look at like
Well,
what's the process even to know?
what I would probably do, like there's not many options, at least in our area. I don't see many options when I go into the home improvement stores here. There's usually just a cheaper one, which is usually just a thinner layer of wax, and then there's the plastic that is used to hold the two sides of the wax together. One side of the wax goes down on the sewage drain, and then the other side of the wax is what the toilet sits on. So one of the reasons you get something thicker is that way, as I said, if your gap in your floor is a little bit wider, you can um, sit the toilet onto the gasket properly, and then you would be able to get a proper seal. Now, there is a downside to getting a bigger gasket because if your spacing from the floor to the bottom of the toilet is actually not as wide, where maybe you're just working with the very lowest layer of floor, you might actually not need a super high one because what would end up happening is if you set the toilet on top of a really thick wax gasket, you end up with a situation where your toilet starts to wobble because the toilet can only put so much weight on the wax gasket for it to seal. So once it's right, like as low down as it can go, if there's still a space between the bottom of the toilet and the top of the floor, it might only be maybe a quarter inch or like a couple centimeters depending on where you're where you're located. But that difference will cause the most annoying wobble underneath your toilet, and you'll either end up having to fill it with either foam, which is not recommended because foam expands and which can offset your toilet again, or you have to fill it with like caulking, or you have to fill it with some kind of filler in order to make it sit properly. So it just, it's always better to look at what your floor is, see what your distance is between the bottom of your, sorry, the, yeah, see what the distance is between the sewage drain and the top of your floor. And if that's very narrow, then you can probably get away with the cheaper one. But if you have layers of flooring where you've accumulated years of layers of floor, which I don't recommend, by the way, then you're probably gonna have to get like a thicker one in order to accommodate for that.
I have so many questions now. I mean, first of all, such a specific questions, but caulking drives me nuts because with a bathtub, it's like you have to change it all the time. It's like every few months, every year, you have to re-caulk it. How often do you have to redo the caulking for your toilet if you're in that situation?
Honestly, it's how you use it, because we have a powder room, and the powder room is only just a toilet and the sink, and it's really only ever used by guests. So it's used so infrequently that it I don't know. I personally can't remember if we've even done it a second time after we put the toilet in. But for the main bathroom, I think it more so depends on the cleaning agents that you use, because the cleaning agents that you use will make a big difference in how it eats away at the caulking that you're using. And it also depends on the quality of caulking that you're using too, because some caulking is better used for like even outdoor application. And those kinds of caulking will actually last quite a long time, but they tend to eat into material a bit more. So if your floor is a certain material, maybe the caulking may not be a good idea, like an outdoor caulking may not be a good idea to use on certain flooring materials. But honestly, there's so many varieties of caulking available that I would probably like I would just read the label and know which one I'm using it for, because I don't even think for a bathroom, like I don't think you should have to change the caulking in a bathroom that often, because if you're going to be, unless you're using something like toilet bowl cleaner, like on the caulking directly and letting it sit into it, it shouldn't degrade as long as you wipe down, your shower area or your bathtub area on a regular basis. It shouldn't degrade it that quickly, I don't think. But I mean, that's just based on my experience.
Are there any times when using foam to fill the gap by the toilet is helpful? Because you said foam is bad because it expands. Is there any time where it's good, or never? Just don't do it.
I would say avoid where possible. I know that if the base of your toilet is really wide, and because the ring itself, like the wax gasket, is only going to be the drain pipe width. That's how they're designed. So if the base of your toilet around that gasket is really wide, it might make sense to fill in foam there, and that's just to prevent if there's any backup, to just delay the spread of water if it's going to happen. But I mean, I personally probably would not, just in general, because expanding foam is really, I would say, for walls and cracks in like outdoor areas, like against bricks or stuff like that. Expanding foam I probably wouldn't use so much on the inside that way. That's more of like a if absolutely necessary situation and you have it on hand.
I love it. So you mentioned also like it's really bad to just add on floors on top of each other. Why is that? Why does that even happen? Like, who thinks it's a good idea ever?
Well, that's more of I would say that's a laziness thing. Actually, I shouldn't say that, because as somebody who's been using, a lot of self work or self contracting services, using my own services to do work, I can definitely see where if you're like, for example, overlaying maybe vinyl planking or vinyl laminate type flooring over top of a tile, I can definitely see where it makes financial sense and where it makes time and energy sense to just kind of overlay it on top of the tile. However, usually what ends up happening is if you get any issues under your floor, like your subfloor or anything like that, and things start to sink, it's much harder to repair than if you ripped up the tile in the first place. But I have ripped up tile, and I would not do that again, and I would not recommend anyone do it. Like, to give you some perspective, I'm 5'1" and I weigh like 110 pounds soaking wet. So it's when you think of like doing that kind of work, you're like, oh yeah, we'll just take a sledgehammer to it and it'll be fine. But if you've never used a sledgehammer and you weigh like only twice as much as a sledgehammer, using a tool like that can be very, very, very intimidating. So it's
yeah. I'm also 5'1", so I'm really interested by this, because then the question is a sledgehammer that heavy? Because it has to be that heavy in order to be effective.
Exactly.
It is.
Exactly.
So it's not like just no one has thought of building us tools appropriate for our sizes.
Well, you can get small sledgehammers, but you'll be at it for a lot longer with a smaller sledgehammer, right? Like, it's easy to break up tile with a sledgehammer, but when you're breaking up, for example, an entire kitchen worth of tile, that's a lot of tile. So, I mean, well, obviously depending on the kitchen size, naturally, but I mean, let's say, your kitchen is maybe 10 feet by 15 feet or 10 feet by 20 feet, and your tiles are 12 by 12, like, it's a lot of breaking. And also depends also on how the tiles are placed. Like, if the mortar is, placed properly, your tiles aren't moving, like, in general, which is good because they're not supposed to, but that also means trying to dig them up is going to be just that much harder. So it's been a lot
so
of
for
fun.
you, between a heavy sledgehammer or a lighter one, you would always rather the heavier one, because it'll just get the job done.
Absolutely, because I'll be sore for a couple of days, and I know I'll be sore for a couple of days, but I know that when it's happening, you blast the music, and like whatever angry music you can find, something that really upsets you, and you just go to town. Really, that's how I've gotten through a lot of renovations. Oh man, the music I have is just, it's got to be loud. It's got to be inspirational, and it's got to be like a long album from somebody, because I want to go from start to finish. And a lot of times that's how I time myself to make sure that I don't overexert myself. Because actually something I did post about in the Handy Woman's Facebook group is how when I painted my house, it was like the house itself is about approximately 2,000 square feet. So, painting that from top to bottom is a lot of work. And one of the things that I posted about was that because of all the painting that I did, I ended up actually with tendonitis in my shoulder. So in my right shoulder, because that's my predominant hand. And at the time while I was working on it, I didn't know that was possible. And I didn't feel the effect right away either. So a lot of people, they just kind of go at it, and then when it's done, yay. But you really gotta make sure that you time yourself, you take your breaks, you rest in between, because I didn't do that. I just went, pardon my expression, balls to the wall, like when it came to getting it done, because it was a lot of house. I had a weekend and I had to get it done. And, I'm still working during all this. I'm still going to school during all this. So it was just, I needed to get it done. And it was about maybe 4 weeks or 3 weeks later, I was in the office, and I couldn't lift my arm past like about here. I went to just like
scary.
I think I went to like scratch my head or something. And I lifted my arm to about here, and it just physically could not go. Like my muscles would not let it go. And I thought, oh, maybe I slept poorly. I couldn't figure out what it was. And then when I went to physio, that's an expensive lesson learned, because, it was there that they asked me, have you done anything strenuous? But here's the thing, painting, you're just doing this. This is what you're doing the entire time. Or maybe you're doing this. So you're not thinking it's strenuous, because it's just emotion. Your muscles are fine, but it's the actual cartilage in your shoulder that's suffering. Because, if you're not used to it, you haven't built that muscle enough to accommodate for it. So I learned that the hard way. And unfortunately, as a result, physio for a few months, and everything got harder. I would never be able to wear my purse on my right arm the same way again. I
Oh,
started
wow.
switching to my left arm because I just, that motion of putting it on, I couldn't do it. So, as much as it, we're aiming to be self-sufficient and in the best ways possible, in the ways that, we really should already be self-sufficient this way, but at the same time, we really need to still take care of ourselves, because being a little person, when you're holding, an 8 foot long rod with a paint roller on the end, you're not thinking about it in the way, because your motion is relatively, in one area, but that can still damage. So
Wow.
that's
So what,
something people should keep in mind.
yeah, seriously. I mean, so what are rules do you have in place? Like when you paint now, what parameters do you follow?
Oh, I literally just do wall by wall. I don't think about painting as room by room anymore. I break it down to be a lot smaller projects within the bigger project. I don't try to go as big and bold as I was before. I definitely, like, even the wall that you're seeing behind me, I just painted it about 2 weeks ago, and I literally just, I started at one wall, and when that wall was dry or was drying, then I would do something else, because that, I know I need to take that break, and especially now that I've had this experience, I'm not willing to replicate that issue again.
Yeah. So I want to go back in time. You help your mom with that house, and then I assume at some point you left that house.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if you looked for, your own, or if you bought your own, but if you have friends who are homeowners, you must have a very different perspective when you're inside a home, whether it's when you're looking at buying or one for your friends, and you're looking at things in a different way than people would. What are things you look at that for you are like a no-brainer that nobody thinks about?
I would say the first, I don't know if everybody does this, but one of the first things I do is I go to find the electrical panel, because there are the standards, like the codes now have changed. Like, the codes change over time in general, but I'm dating an electrician, and my mom works in the electrical department of the home improvement store where she works. So and seeing how, and maybe I guess I say how important the electrical aspect is of a home, because that's the one key, other than your framing, the electrical and plumbing are the other key things that run through the entire house. Things like walls can be taken down and put back. Kitchens can be moved around, like, within reason. But when it comes to the base electrical and the foundation, I guess is what I would really say is, I'd say electrical, plumbing are the foundations, and those are the things that I kind of hone in on, because I don't really care so much about counters, like cabinets. Like, to me, those are all things that, at one call to, I don't know, IKEA, you can get those ripped out and put back and changed. So I feel like a lot of people really focus on things like, even like closet. They think, oh, it has to have a walk-in closet, or it has to have, a specific size closet. You can actually build out a closet pretty easily, even if it means building into your living space. A closet can be built out almost. I haven't seen a closet that hasn't been able to be built out yet. So it's just things like that, I feel are things that people look at, and in my opinion are very superficial. I don't even look at paint colors anymore. When I go into places, I don't care. But one thing I do care about, actually, that might be a little superficial, is the ceiling height, because ceiling height determines, how you store things. And where I live now, even though I no longer live with my mom, where I live now, the ceiling height is a 10-foot ceiling, versus where my mom is, it's an 8 foot, which is the standard ceiling height in this area. So having that extra 2 feet doesn't seem like it's a lot, but when I know my shelving can go up versus out, it actually saves me a lot of floor space, for just, just being the rooms, and just feel a little bit bigger, because I have more wall space to use. So that might be a little bit superficial, but otherwise, no, I don't really care too much about layout. I don't, as long as I know where my load bearing walls are. Like, there's very few few things I care about, because I know that even if it's just me working on it, or me and my mom, or me and, a friend, or even if we do hire a contractor, like I'll actually be able to know, okay, we can change this, we can change that. It's no longer as much of a big deal to me, I think, as it would have been had I not had a lot of the renovation experience that I do.
And that's why you're looking at the ceiling space as something important to look at, because that is not something you can easily just push up and just say, I want more ceiling.
Yep.
All right, off we go. Not like you can with a
Exactly.
So it is indeed not what you call superficial. It's just really hard, like easy to fix. And what you call like something important to look at is anything that will take a long time or that will properly be hard to do.
Yes.
Which makes a lot of sense. You mentioned you look at the electrical panel when you visit a house. What do you look at on it? Like what can somebody who doesn't know about electricity can pay attention to?
Well, I mean, I think that depends kind of based on region, but I do know in this region, the standard panel used to be 100 amps. And what a lot of people do is they'll upgrade their home in many different ways, but they usually neglect the panel. So what ends up happening is you end up upgrading your home with all of these fancy gadgets. Like now, maybe your stove is like now not just the stove, but now you also have like a built-in microwave, like, or maybe a range hood. Like there's a lot of different things that, people have upgraded in their lives. And even though things have become more energy efficient, which is great, at the same time, we're still using a lot more technical or technological products that require power. So sometimes people don't upgrade the homes don't upgrade the panels at the same time that they're upgrading the homes. A lot of times people try to piggyback off of like, power that's already there. So to give you an example, one of the things I saw recently in the house where my mom is there is one outlet that is just a receptacle, and in that receptacle, they've piggybacked like about four different things. They piggybacked like the microwave, they piggybacked the under cabinet lighting, they piggybacked onto that like over the sink lighting. So a lot of these things that are now attaching to this one receptacle, like it makes it a lot harder to manage. And technically speaking, it's done correctly, but once again, these are all additions, right? When that receptacle was first put in place, that receptacle was probably just, this is where we plug things in and that's it, right? There's not likely that there was, extra light switches attached to it or extra lights attached to it. So, I mean, it's a small addition, because lights don't run on huge power, especially when they're LEDs. But in general, because we start doing a lot of these upgrades, we really should make sure that when we're doing those upgrades, we're taking into consideration that the panel may need to be upgraded as well as we go. And so that's one of the key things. Right now, we're on previously the standard was like 100 amps, for example. Now the code has changed, and the standard for new builds is 200 amps. So, I mean, new builds make sense, but if you're getting into like an older home, that's something you would probably want to take a look at.
Oh, I love all of that. All right, final question for you. If you look at all the projects you've done, which clearly are so many across time, which is one where you're like just so freaking proud of yourself? Which probably all of them, but one where you're like, oh, I did this myself. Yes.
I would probably say, oh geez, no, there's a few. You're right, there's a few.
It seems that way. Well, you can say a couple.
I'm thinking. So one thing that I'm really super proud of is the garden. So this is not necessarily an inside home renovation, but an outside home. So instead of hiring a landscaper, what we did was we dug up and this was me and my boyfriend actually when we did this. We dug up the backyard at the house. We laid new sod. We dug down some garden space for my mom's flowers, and then we installed a path from the shed to kind of like the front walkway. So, I mean, it doesn't seem, in hindsight, it was a lot of work, and that's probably what I am most proud of, because when I go to the house and anyone's visiting, that's usually the first thing I'll say when we go to the backyard is, they'll go in and they'll be like, wow, the backyard's so nice. And I'm like, yeah, that was me and my boyfriend. We did that.
That's
Because
awesome.
we did like the fencing around the garden. It was a lot of work. We had to do a lot of the tilling. We had to actually grind down a tree stump as well. So there was a lot happening there. So that's probably the thing that I am most proud of is the outdoor space in the house. And I think the second thing is actually the laundry room. I don't have a photo of it, so I can't really share, but it was basically just a corner of the basement and unused, just very, like, it was unfinished. And we did the drywall. We got the panel is also in the laundry room, so we built like a case around the panel. We installed some countertops in the laundry room with some cupboards underneath, and then I did all the tiling on the floor as well. So I think from a interior perspective, the laundry room is probably my favorite, and then outside, yeah, the backyard is
Yeah.
basically
And that kind of makes sense because those are two projects that you can see day in and day out. It's like if you nail like changing the toilet or the drywall, you don't really have that like
yes.
feedback every day. It's like, well, I swear the plumbing behind the wall is beautiful. I kid you not, it really is. Look at this water falling like it should. It's
Oh,
like, but instead, like the
that's
laundry room,
awesome.
it's like, look, here's the proof of my work. And same with the
Yes,
outdoor. Like, look, you can
exactly.
enjoy it, you can see it, you can sit on
Yes.
it. You have like 3D experience with it at all times after the work is done.
That's a great way to explain it. I didn't even think about it that way. But yes, you are 100% correct. It is like people come in and sure, I can be like, yeah, I painted the place. But then at the same time, you're in it all the time. So you don't, it's just like that's what it is. But when you go in and you have that 3D and you like experience the whole setup, like when I'm doing laundry, I put my clothes on the counter, like after it's out of the dryer. And then I take the soap from underneath the cabinet and then like it is an interactive experience, and I think that's exactly it. You nailed it. That's definitely why I probably thought that those were my two most prized renos.
Yeah, and then the landscape on top of that, it's like a little bit architectural because you have this
Mhm.
space and you can create different areas. You can make it one big area. You can have it have different functions. Like, do I want this to be where we eat, and this for the maybe if there are children, that's where they play, and this
Yeah,
is where we have an actual vegetable garden. There's a lot of like actual design and conception with it that a lot of
right.
renovation don't have.
You're right, absolutely. And I did have to learn how to use a few applications in the process of doing the backyard. And now that you've mentioned it, like there's a few home plan apps that you can use online that are just free to use, and you can actually design a space. And that's kind of how I was able to determine, the garden would be able to go from here to here, and the sod would have to get laid from here to here because I was able to map it all out ahead of time, and then go forward with the actual
What are those
doing of the
apps?
work. I honestly would have to look them up. I know I think one is called like Home Styler or something like that. But it's just like you have the option to do a three-dimensional room, or you can just do like a 2D like square drawing type of thing. So it gives you a grid that you can use online, and then you draw your lines based on what you've measured in the field, we'll call it. And then you can lay out different sections. Or what I did was I actually printed out the border of my garden area, and then I actually drew on it myself because then I knew it was to scale. So that helped a lot because having it to scale on the grid makes it obviously a lot easier to apply it, in the real world. So that's how I did it.
Thank you so much for sharing. And thank you for sharing all of your like knowledge and projects and inspiring us handy women to cover us women who have not done handiwork yet to get started. It's possible. Everyone who's done handiwork started from not having done it first. So that's how it works. Thank you, Kerry, for sharing your time with us on the Handy Women Show, and keep up the great work.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for inviting me. I appreciate it. I'm hoping that this can help all the people like myself that did not have the chance, to look this up, in the past, because I feel like if we had this kind of support system, or if we had this kind of, interactivity with the online world, we would have definitely been, I think, at least a little bit further ahead than, you know, us doing it nowadays. So thank you so much for sharing this kind of feedback with everybody.
Oh, my pleasure. It's so fun. All right. See you all next time on the Handy Women show. Bye.